Warning, if you are listening to this during winter, if the air around you feels cold, if the wind outside your window sounds like distant whispering, you may want to stop now, because tonight we are entering the frozen forests of North America, where a legend older than modern civilization still stalks the trees. This is not just a ghost story. This is a warning, and it begins with hunger, long before cities existed, before highways cut through wilderness. The Algonquian tribes of the northern forests spoke of something that lived beyond the tree line, something that was once human, but became something else. They called it the Wendigo, a spirit of endless hunger, a creature born not from death, but from greed, desperation, and cannibalism. The elders said that during brutal winters, when food ran out and snow buried the land, some people made a choice that could never be undone. They consumed human flesh to survive. And when they did, the Wendigo entered them. But this was no simple possession. The transformation was slow, painful, and unstoppable. Those afflicted would first complain of a strange chill that never left their bones. No matter how close they sat to the fire, they felt frozen inside. Their eyes would darken, their voices would become distant. And then came the hunger, a hunger so powerful it erased morality. A craving that no animal meat could satisfy. Historical accounts describe entire hunting parties vanishing during winter expeditions. Survivors would sometimes return alone, claiming their companions changed. One 18th century fur trader recorded in his journal that a guide traveling with him began behaving strangely after a snowstorm isolated their group for days. The man refused food. He stared into the forest at night. And then one evening, he vanished from camp. Days later, they found what remained of another missing traveler, partially eaten, frozen into the snow. The guide was never seen again. But here is where the legend grows darker. Because the Wendigo is not simply a monster that kills. It is a creature that grows. The more it eats, the larger it becomes. But it never feels full. Witnesses describe it as unnaturally tall. Its body thin and skeletal, skin stretched tight against bone, as though starvation continues, even after feeding. Some accounts describe glowing eyes watching from treetops. Others claim its limbs are too long, bending at unnatural angles, as it moves between trees faster than any human could run. The most chilling detail, it mimics voices. Hunters in remote forests reported hearing loved ones calling their names from deep within the woods. Even when those loved ones were miles away, some followed the voices, few returned. Those who did often spoke of something watching them just beyond sight, pacing them between trees, staying just out of reach. In the early 1900s, a remote northern settlement reported a series of disappearances during a record-breaking winter. Supplies ran out. Temperatures dropped beyond survival levels. According to reports later collected by local authorities, paranoia spread through the community. People accused one another of being touched by the Wendigo. One man, said to be gentle and quiet before winter, suddenly became violent, claiming he could hear something whispering from outside his cabin at night, promising warmth if he would only open the door. He was later found wandering barefoot in the snow, muttering about hunger, though he had eaten hours before. Psychologists later labeled such cases as Wendigo psychosis, a culture-bound syndrome involving cannibalistic obsession during extreme famine. But here is what they cannot explain. Modern encounters, where no famine exists. In recent decades, hikers in northern forests of Canada and the United States have reported seeing impossibly tall figures standing between trees at dusk. Some describe the creature as having antler-like shapes extending from its skull, though traditional folklore varies on this detail. What remains consistent is the feeling. Witnesses report overwhelming dread. Sudden silence in the forest. No birds, no wind, just the sense of being watched. One documented park ranger report describes responding to a missing persons call, involving two campers who vanished after sending a final text message that read, "We hear something outside the tent." When search teams arrived, they found the campsite undisturbed. No signs of struggle. No footprints leading away. Just claw-like marks in the snow, circling the tent. The bodies were never recovered. And then there are the sounds. Audio recordings captured by winter researchers sometimes contain distant shrieks echoing through valleys, sounds that do not match wolves, bears, or known wildlife. Some describe it as a scream mixed with a howl, stretching unnaturally long, as though carried by something not entirely physical. Elders still warn that speaking too much about the Wendigo invites its attention, that fear feeds it, that greed strengthens it. Some believe it is not merely a creature, but a spirit representing humanity's darkest impulses: gluttony, selfishness, the willingness to consume others to survive. And yet, too many sightings describe something with physical presence, something that leaves tracks, something that hunts. There is one final detail rarely mentioned outside indigenous storytelling circles. The Wendigo's heart is said to be made of ice, and to destroy it, one must melt that frozen heart. But no verified account exists of anyone successfully doing so, because those who hunt the Wendigo often disappear themselves. The legend of the Wendigo is deeply rooted in the harsh realities faced by the Algonquian peoples, particularly the extreme conditions of winter in North America. But beyond a simple cautionary tale, there's a fascinating psychological layer to this myth. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a phenomenon known as Wendigo psychosis was documented. This was described as a culture-bound syndrome, where individuals living in isolation, often facing starvation, would develop an intense craving for human flesh and a paralyzing fear that they were transforming into a Wendigo. They would become withdrawn, anxious, and obsessed with the idea of consumption. Anthropologists and psychologists have debated the nature of this condition for years. Was it a genuine psychiatric disorder? Or was it a culturally accepted way to explain the unthinkable acts that extreme hunger could drive people to? The isolation and food scarcity created a perfect storm for intense psychological distress, and the Wendigo myth provided a framework to understand and articulate this terrifying internal struggle. It became a way for communities to process the horrors of famine and the breakdown of social norms. This powerful symbolism has not been lost on modern storytellers. The Wendigo has clawed its way out of ancient folklore and into contemporary pop culture, appearing in everything from Stephen King novels to TV shows like Supernatural and even video games. In these modern interpretations, the Wendigo is often more than just a physical monster. It has become a potent metaphor for insatiable greed, addiction, and the destructive nature of endless consumption that characterizes much of modern society. The creature represents what happens when want overtakes need, when an individual's desires become so all-consuming that they destroy not only others but themselves in the process. It's a chilling reminder that the line between humanity and monstrosity can be frighteningly thin, especially when we let our darkest appetites take control. The myth serves as a timeless warning against the kind of greed that consumes everything in its path, leaving only emptiness behind. Thank you for watching. If you found this interesting, be sure to like and subscribe for more explorations into the world's most fascinating myths. Warning: what you are about to hear is not just legend, but a case that blurred the line between folklore and documented history. A case so disturbing that even today it is debated by historians, psychologists, and paranormal investigators alike. Because in the early 20th century, deep in the frozen wilderness of northern Canada, a man claimed that something had entered him, something ancient, something starving, something that would not let him sleep. And that man's name was Swift Runner. According to archived reports, Swift Runner was a trapper, living with his family during one of the harshest winters recorded in the region. Snowstorms buried supply routes, food became scarce, and isolation stretched for months. When authorities eventually arrived at his cabin, after receiving word that his family had not been seen in some time, they found a scene that still chills researchers today. Swift Runner was alive. His wife and children were not. Their remains had been partially consumed. Yet investigators later confirmed that emergency food supplies were located less than a day's journey away, close enough that survival without resorting to cannibalism was possible. During questioning, Swift Runner reportedly claimed that a spirit had taken hold of him, that he had felt an unbearable hunger and a coldness inside his body that no fire could warm, and that he believed he had become the Wendigo. He described hearing whispers in the wind outside his cabin, promising relief from suffering if he would feed the hunger. He claimed he tried to resist. He claimed he begged for the voices to stop. But the cold inside him grew stronger each night, until he no longer recognized himself. Authorities ultimately charged and executed him, labeling the incident as murder driven by starvation-induced madness. Yet among indigenous communities, the case became something else, proof that the Wendigo was not just myth, but a force capable of possessing the desperate and turning them into something monstrous. But Swift Runner was not the only one. Another documented case involved a respected hunter who suddenly began telling members of his tribe that he feared he was transforming. He begged elders to restrain him before he harmed anyone. Witnesses claimed he refused food, yet spoke constantly of insatiable hunger. He described dreams of running through forests on elongated limbs, chasing prey that screamed with human voices, terrified for their safety, and believing the transformation had already begun. Tribal leaders reportedly made the tragic decision to end his life before he could end theirs. Anthropologists later debated whether these incidents were examples of Wendigo psychosis, a culture-bound syndrome rooted in extreme stress and famine. But critics argue that explanation ignores consistent details repeated across generations: the unshakable cold, the voice mimicry, the sudden behavioral shift, and the terrifying speed and strength attributed to those believed to be transforming. Modern researchers have attempted to trace these accounts geographically, mapping sightings across dense northern forests, and a chilling pattern emerges. Reports cluster near regions known for brutal winters and historical starvation events. But here is what disturbs investigators: most contemporary sightings continue, even in times of abundance. In 2008, a group of snowmobilers traveling through remote woodland reported seeing a towering figure standing between trees during a whiteout storm. They described it as impossibly tall, its shoulders narrow and angular, its limbs too long for a human body. One rider claimed its eyes reflected their headlights from nearly 8 feet above the ground. When they attempted to approach, the engine of the lead snowmobile stalled without explanation. The figure did not run. It simply stepped backward into the trees and vanished. Days later, the same group reported recurring nightmares of being chased across frozen lakes by something that never seemed to tire. Park authorities often attribute such sightings to moose, bears standing upright, or optical illusions created by snow and shadow. Yet some encounters defy simple explanation. In a 2015 incident, a solo winter hiker activated an emergency beacon after claiming he was being followed. When rescue teams arrived, they found him hypothermic and disoriented, repeatedly whispering, "It keeps calling me by my brother's voice." There were tracks in the snow surrounding his campsite, but they were inconsistent, alternating between what appeared to be human footprints and elongated impressions that stretched too far apart for a normal stride. The hiker survived, but later refused to speak publicly, insisting that what stalked him was not an animal. One of the most frightening aspects of the Wendigo legend is the idea that it grows larger with every victim, yet remains emaciated, symbolizing endless hunger. Some folklore describes its heart as a frozen block of ice that cannot melt, representing a complete loss of humanity. Elders say that once the transformation is complete, the original person is gone, replaced by something that remembers how to speak, how to lure, how to trick. It does not charge wildly like a beast. It waits, it studies, it isolates its prey from others before striking. There are also accounts of entire communities hearing screams echoing across frozen lakes at night, sounds that resemble both human cries and animal howls combined. Audio analysts reviewing modern recordings note frequency distortions that do not match known wildlife patterns. Though skeptics argue, environmental acoustics can produce strange effects. Still, the psychological impact remains undeniable. Witnesses often describe an overwhelming sense of dread moments before encounters, as if the forest itself falls silent in warning. No wind, no movement. Just stillness, heavy enough to make breathing feel loud. In interviews conducted with indigenous storytellers, Many emphasize that the Wendigo is not simply a monster in the trees, but a cautionary embodiment of greed and imbalance. They warn that when communities lose respect for nature, when selfishness outweighs survival ethics, the spirit awakens. Some even suggest that the modern world, with its unchecked consumption and environmental destruction, reflects the very hunger the Wendigo represents. But, whether symbolic or literal, sightings persist. One chilling modern theory proposes that the Wendigo may not be bound to wilderness alone. Long stretches of isolated highway cutting through dense forest have become hotspots for strange reports, drivers claiming to see tall figures pacing their vehicles from the tree line, keeping perfect speed before disappearing. Truckers describe hearing scratching on trailer doors during blizzards when no one else is present. A handful of dashcam videos circulating online show fleeting shapes moving unnaturally fast between snow-covered trees, though none have been conclusively verified. Perhaps the most disturbing pattern is this. Many who report seeing the Wendigo say it does not attack immediately. Instead, it observes. It waits for exhaustion, for isolation, for emotional vulnerability. It lets fear grow, because fear, like hunger, feeds it. And in part 3, we explore first-hand testimonies from individuals who claim they survived direct confrontation. People who insist they looked into its eyes and saw not just a monster, but something that used to be human. In our previous episodes, we delved into the shadowy origins and unsettling sightings of the Wendigo. Today, in part 3, we move from legend to the terrifying reality of direct confrontation. We will hear from those who looked into the abyss and, against all odds, survived to tell the tale. These are their stories, raw and unfiltered. Our first account comes from a former park ranger, a man who spent 30 years in the northern wilderness. He spoke to us on the condition of anonymity, his voice still trembling years after the event. It was a late autumn evening, he began, the kind where the cold bites deep and the forest goes completely silent. I was doing a final patrol near an old abandoned mining camp. That's when I saw it. It wasn't an animal. It was too tall, too thin, like a skeleton stretched over a frame that was all wrong. Its skin was the color of old bruises, tight against bone, and the eyes. They were just black pits, but I felt them watching me, knowing me. It didn't move like anything natural. It sort of unfolded from behind a tree. There was this intelligence, a predatory cunning in its stillness. It wasn't just a hungry beast. It was thinking, planning. I didn't even reach for my rifle. I just backed away, slowly, and ran for my life when I was out of its immediate sight. I never went back to that sector again. The nightmares, they never really leave. You see those empty eyes every time you close yours. Another survivor, a hiker who became lost during a blizzard, shared a similarly harrowing experience. The storm was a whiteout, she recalled. I'd been wandering for hours, hypothermia setting in. I found a small cave for shelter. As I huddled inside, I heard something outside, a sound that wasn't the wind. It was a faint, high-pitched mimicry of a human cry for help. My first instinct was to call back, to go out, but something held me back. The sound was too perfect, yet completely devoid of emotion. It was a lure. Peeking out, I saw a silhouette against the snow, impossibly gaunt and moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. It paced back and forth, repeating the cry, testing the area. It knew I was in there. It was trying to trick me into coming out. I spent the entire night listening to that horrible, soulless imitation of human suffering, praying for the sun to rise. The psychological scar is worse than any frostbite. It's the memory of that cold, calculating intelligence, using our own compassion as a weapon against us. It's a violation of what it means to be human. These accounts paint a chilling portrait, not just of a monster, but of a malevolent intellect. The trauma isn't just from seeing a creature, it's from being seen, understood, and hunted by it. Join us next time as we explore the disturbing patterns of Wendigo encounters and the desperate methods people have used to fight back. Subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare. Warning: the most terrifying part of the Wendigo legend is not its height, not its hunger, not even the stories of cannibalism whispered during brutal winters. It is the belief that somewhere inside the creature, buried beneath ice and starvation, there remains the echo of a human soul, and those who claim to have seen it up close insist that when it looks at you, there is recognition in its eyes. In 1999, two experienced hunters ventured deep into a remote northern forest during late December, tracking elk across frozen terrain. Both men were familiar with the land, both carried rifles, and both later swore that what they encountered was not an animal. According to the only surviving hunter, they first sensed something wrong when the forest fell completely silent. No wind through branches, no distant animal calls, only the crunch of their own boots in snow. Then they heard it, a voice calling one of their names from somewhere ahead. It sounded exactly like his younger brother, who was home hundreds of miles away. The second hunter laughed nervously, assuming it was wind, distortion, or imagination. But the voice came again, closer this time, whispering from behind a cluster of trees. Against instinct, they followed. That decision would cost one of them his life. The survivor later described seeing a figure step partially from behind a tree, impossibly tall. Its shoulders narrow and angular, its ribs faintly visible beneath grayish skin stretched too tight across bone. Its arms seemed too long, hanging almost to its knees, fingers thin and claw-like. But it was the face that froze him in place. Sunken cheeks, hollow eyes, reflecting pale winter light, and a mouth slightly open, as if mid. For a brief second, he believed it was a starving man in need of help. Then the creature tilted its head unnaturally, mimicking the hunter's own posture, and spoke again in his brother's voice. "Come here." His partner stepped forward before he could react. The forest erupted into motion, snow scattering, a blur of elongated limbs, and then silence returned just as suddenly. No scream lasted more than a second. When the survivor fired his rifle into the trees, there was nothing there. No tracks leading away, no blood, only disturbed snow where his friend had stood. Search parties combed the area for weeks. The body was never recovered. In another case from 2012, a group of documentary filmmakers attempting to capture winter wildlife. Footage reported repeated equipment malfunctions during a remote shoot. Batteries drained instantly, despite being fully charged. Microphones picked up distorted breathing layered beneath normal wind sounds. One cameraman reviewing footage later noticed something standing in the background of a wide forest shot, a thin vertical shape between trees. That did not move for nearly 4 minutes of recording. When zoomed in, the shape appeared to have elongated limbs and reflective eyes. The crew returned to the location the next day, but the snow showed no signs of footprints, human or animal. That night, one of the crew members awoke screaming, claiming he saw a tall figure standing outside his cabin window, watching him without blinking. Production ended early. Perhaps the most psychologically disturbing encounters are those involving mimicry inside homes. A family living near dense woodland reported hearing their daughter's voice calling from outside during a blizzard, even though she was asleep in her bedroom. The father nearly opened the door before realizing the voice was coming from the wrong direction, drifting from the tree line instead of the porch. The next morning, they discovered tall impressions in the snow circling their house, spaced too far apart for normal human steps, yet not matching any known wildlife tracks. The daughter later described dreaming of a thin man with ice in his chest, who stood at the foot of her bed and whispered that he was hungry. Indigenous elders have long warned that the Wendigo's greatest weapon is not strength, but deception. It isolates its prey psychologically before attacking physically. It studies routines, it listens. Some accounts suggest it can observe a family for days before making contact, choosing moments when trust and familiarity can be exploited. Hunters speak of hearing familiar laughter carried unnaturally far through frozen air. Campers describe waking to the sound of footsteps circling tents, followed by their own voices whispering from just beyond the fabric walls. One survivor of such an incident claimed the footsteps stopped only when he began praying aloud, though he admitted he could not explain why. There are even darker testimonies, individuals who believe they narrowly avoided transformation themselves. A man interviewed anonymously in northern Minnesota described feeling sudden, overwhelming hunger during a winter survival excursion after becoming separated from his group. Despite having food supplies, he found himself staring at his own frostbitten hand and imagining what it would taste like. He reported hearing distant howls that seemed to respond to his thoughts. When he was rescued 2 days later, he claimed the cold inside him lingered for weeks, an emotional numbness that frightened him more than the wilderness itself. He later sought counseling, terrified that he had felt the beginning. Skeptics attribute these experiences to hypothermia, isolation, stress, and auditory hallucinations caused by extreme weather conditions. And it is true that prolonged cold can distort perception. But what remains unexplained are the physical traces, the elongated tracks, the missing persons cases with no evidence of animal attack, the synchronized accounts of voice mimicry across regions, separated by hundreds of miles. Cryptozoologists propose unknown predators. Psychologists suggest cultural imprinting. Yet neither explanation fully accounts for why so many describe the same hollow eyes, the same skeletal frame, the same overwhelming sense that what stands before them was once human. One recurring detail in survivor accounts is the smell, a foul combination of decay and frozen earth, as though something long dead continues to walk. Witnesses say the odor arrives before the sighting, carried on windless air. Animals react first. Dogs whine and refuse to move. Horses rear without visible cause. Wildlife scatters abruptly. And then the forest falls silent. Always the silence. As though nature itself withdraws in warning. Some storytellers insist the Wendigo cannot cross running water, while others argue it can follow prey anywhere winter reaches. What nearly all agree on is this: direct eye contact seals something unspoken. Survivors often report recurring dreams afterward, of running endlessly through snow, while something tall keeps pace behind them, never tiring, never breathing heavily. They wake gasping, convinced they can still hear distant howls blending with wind. And so the question remains, are these encounters manifestations of psychological stress amplified by folklore? Or is there truly something ancient moving between frozen trees? Something born from humanity's darkest act, consuming its own, and cursed to wander in endless hunger. In Part 4, we explore reports suggesting the Wendigo may no longer be confined to remote wilderness, and that sightings are increasing along modern highways and isolated towns during winter storms. Subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare. Warning: for centuries, the Wendigo was believed to belong to the deep wilderness, far from cities, far from highways, far from streetlights and civilization. But in recent decades, reports have surfaced that suggest something deeply unsettling. The hunger is no longer confined to the forest, and winter roads cutting through remote landscapes may now serve as hunting grounds. Truck drivers traveling long northern highways during blizzards have described seeing impossibly tall silhouettes pacing their vehicles just beyond the tree line, keeping perfect speed despite deep snow, their reflective eyes briefly caught in headlights before vanishing between trees. One veteran driver reported that during a whiteout storm in northern Ontario, he saw a thin figure standing directly in the center of the road ahead. As he slammed on the brakes, the figure did not move but seemed to stretch upward, unnaturally tall, its limbs elongated like shadows pulled by distant light. When the truck finally stopped, the road was empty. No footprints, no tracks, nothing but swirling snow. Emergency dispatch records from isolated regions show unusual clusters of 911 calls during severe winter storms. Callers reporting someone walking outside in the storm without a coat or a tall man standing near the tree line. In most cases, responding officers find no one, yet several reports include something harder to dismiss. Drivers claiming they heard their own names spoken through closed windows while alone on empty roads. One woman traveling home after work during a heavy snowfall described hearing her mother's voice clearly from the passenger seat, urging her to pull over. Her mother had died years earlier. The moment she refused and kept driving, she claimed she saw a thin figure sprint parallel to her car before disappearing into darkness. She arrived home shaken, later discovering unexplained scratches along the passenger side door, too high off the ground to be caused by roadside brush. Search and rescue teams working winter disappearances have quietly acknowledged cases that defy simple explanation. In 2017, 2 snowshoers vanished along a marked trail despite mild winter conditions and functioning GPS devices. Their final transmitted coordinates showed no deviation from the path. When search teams arrived, they found a strange pattern in the snow, elongated impressions circling the campsite, too narrow for snowshoes, spaced too widely for human stride. Wildlife experts ruled out moose and bear due to track shape. Thermal drones scanning the area detected no large animals nearby. The missing hikers were never found. One volunteer later claimed he heard distant calling that sounded like one of the missing men's voices, though he knew logically it could not be him. Perhaps most disturbing are incidents where witnesses report seeing something watching from elevated positions, treetops, overpasses, even rooftops near forest edges. A security guard monitoring cameras at a remote industrial facility bordering woodland reported reviewing footage of a tall, skeletal figure standing just beyond the property fence during a snowstorm. The figure remained motionless for nearly an hour, despite heavy snowfall. When the guard and a supervisor stepped outside to investigate, nothing was there and no footprints marked the ground. The footage later became corrupted, glitching precisely at the moment the figure appeared. IT specialists blamed file damage. The guard resigned weeks later, citing recurring nightmares of hollow eyes staring through his bedroom window. Modern folklore forums have documented dozens of winter highway encounters describing the same details: extreme height, unnatural thinness, glowing or reflective eyes, and an overwhelming sense of dread preceding the sighting. Skeptics argue that fear amplifies perception in dangerous weather conditions, and yet, experienced outdoorsmen, hunters, rangers, survivalists are among those reporting these sightings, individuals accustomed to isolation and winter extremes. One ranger anonymously stated that, during patrol near a frozen lake, he observed what he believed was a lost hiker standing across the ice. Through binoculars, he saw the figure's limbs appeared too long, its posture rigid. When he radioed for backup and looked again, the figure was closer, far closer, without any visible movement across the ice. Backup arrived within minutes. Nothing remained on the frozen surface. Indigenous elders warn that modern expansion into wilderness has disturbed old balances. They teach that the Wendigo represents not just physical hunger, but spiritual corruption, greed without limit, consumption without restraint. Some believe that as humanity continues to exploit natural resources without regard for consequence, the spirit grows stronger, manifesting more boldly. Whether metaphor or reality, sightings appear to increase during periods of extreme cold, particularly when storms isolate communities and reduce visibility. It is during these moments of vulnerability, when roads empty and survival instincts heighten, that encounters are most frequently reported. Psychologists examining these cases emphasize the role of environmental stress, hypothermia, and cognitive distortion under survival conditions. But even they struggle to explain consistent physical evidence, unexplained track patterns, missing persons without trace, synchronized auditory hallucinations among multiple witnesses. Audio recordings captured during winter expeditions sometimes contain layered vocal distortions, something resembling a human scream stretched unnaturally long, blending with wind but persisting beyond gust patterns. Wildlife biologists analyzing the sounds often classify them as unidentifiable. There is also a growing online community claiming that the Wendigo does not simply hunt individuals. It chooses those already experiencing emotional isolation. Survivors frequently describe personal struggles prior to encounters: grief, guilt, overwhelming stress. Some theorists suggest the entity feeds not only on flesh, but on despair itself, that it senses weakness long before physical proximity. A chilling pattern emerges in testimonies. The feeling of being watched begins days before the sighting. Animals react first, then electronics malfunction, then the silence falls, and finally, the voice calls. Always familiar, always personal. In several reported cases, those who ignored the voice survived, those who responded disappeared, and as winter storms grow more unpredictable in a changing climate, isolated regions face longer periods of disconnection, creating the perfect conditions for legend to become encounter. Whether psychological phenomenon or something ancient walking upright between trees, the fear remains the same. A predator that looks human, speaks human, but has abandoned humanity entirely. And in the final part of episode 2, we confront the darkest question of all. If the Wendigo begins as human, could it happen again? Could extreme desperation still awaken it in the modern world? And if so, how would we recognize the transformation before it is too late? Subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare. For centuries, the legend of the Wendigo has ended the same way, with disappearance, with silence, with a trail that goes cold beneath fresh snow. But the most disturbing part of the story is not how it hunts, it is how it begins. Because the Wendigo is not born, it is made. Indigenous teachings across regions of northern North America describe it not simply as a monster lurking in the forest, but as a transformation, a corruption that begins within a human soul. During times of extreme famine, brutal winters, or isolation so severe that hope collapses inward, something changes. A line is crossed, and once crossed, it cannot be undone. In older oral traditions, the transformation begins subtly. A person stranded in winter, food runs out, the cold tightens around the body, hunger sharpens into pain, and then comes the thought, the forbidden one, survival at any cost. The moment that thought is accepted, even briefly, the spirit of the Wendigo is said to take root. But modern retellings add something darker. They say the hunger doesn't wait for starvation anymore. It waits for desperation. There are documented cases in psychiatric history known as Wendigo psychosis, where individuals, in isolated northern communities, developed intense cravings for human flesh despite access to other food. Western psychology often attributes this to cultural influence combined with extreme stress. Yet some case studies contain details that remain deeply unsettling. In the early 1900s, several individuals in remote areas reportedly expressed fear of becoming the Wendigo before any violent act occurred. They described intrusive thoughts, a sensation of growing taller, of their skin tightening, of their heartbeat slowing in cold air. Some begged to be restrained. A few asked to be killed before they changed. Were these cases of mental illness shaped by cultural fear, or were they warnings? In modern times, the transformation narrative has evolved. Online forums and paranormal researchers track strange behavior patterns preceding certain disappearances in cold regions. Individuals withdrawing socially, fixating on cold environments, expressing unusual fascination with starvation or endurance, complaints of feeling constantly hungry despite eating, reports of hearing distant calling in winter winds. Of course, correlation is not proof, but patterns create unease. A survivalist blogger once wrote about spending a month alone in a remote cabin during winter for a self-imposed challenge. His early posts were enthusiastic, then they became erratic. He wrote about hearing footsteps outside at night, about something watching from the tree line, about dreams of running barefoot through snow without feeling cold. His final entry was short. "I understand now. It's not chasing me. It's waiting for me to let it in." Search teams found the cabin weeks later. The door was open, supplies untouched, no tracks leading away, just an unnatural stillness. Biologists argue that predators in winter conserve energy. They do not waste movement. They wait for weakness. And that is exactly how the Wendigo is described. It does not attack immediately. It studies. Witnesses who survived encounters often say the same thing. The creature could have taken them. It was close enough. Instead, it retreated, as if assessing, as if deciding. Some believe the Wendigo does not simply kill. It recruits. The transformation, according to legend, is irreversible. Once someone gives in to the hunger, whether through an act of cannibalism or through complete surrender to greed and selfishness, their body begins to change. They grow thinner, no matter how much they consume. Their lips crack from constant cold. Their skin pales like frostbitten bark. Their eyes sink inward but reflect light unnaturally. They begin avoiding warmth. They prefer the cold. In extreme versions of the myth, bones elongate, fingers stretch, teeth sharpen. The body becomes a walking famine, starved yet insatiable. Modern horror films often depict the Wendigo with antlers and a skull-like face. But many indigenous accounts reject that imagery, emphasizing something far more terrifying. It looks almost human. Almost. That word is where the fear lives. Because if it still looks human, how would you know? Some researchers have drawn comparisons between the Wendigo legend and psychological concepts of unchecked greed. In a metaphorical sense, the creature represents what happens when consumption becomes identity, when taking replaces giving, when survival overrides morality. And in today's world, where excess is often celebrated, some elders quietly ask whether the Wendigo has already evolved beyond the forest. But beyond symbolism, there are still those who claim physical encounters continue. In 2021, a group of winter campers in a remote northern region reported hearing something mimic their laughter from the trees after midnight. The mimicry was distorted, slightly delayed, as if learning the rhythm of human joy. One camper shined a flashlight into the woods and described seeing two reflective eyes far above normal human height. They left before dawn. They later returned with local authorities. No footprints, no animal tracks, just a ring of disturbed snow circling where their tent had stood. The most chilling detail in many encounters is temperature. Survivors describe a sudden drop in warmth seconds before sensing its presence. Not the gradual cold of winter night, but a sharp suffocating chill, breath freezing midair, sound dampened, even wind seeming to stop. Then comes the smell, rot, decay, like something long dead but still moving. Hunters in isolated regions sometimes speak of the wrong silence. Forests have natural quiet, but this silence is described as heavy, intentional, as if every living creature has fled at once. And in that silence, sometimes, a voice calls. Your name, soft at first, then closer, the voice of someone you trust. The final stage of transformation, according to legend, is complete loss of humanity. The Wendigo forgets who it was. It remembers only hunger. It roams endlessly through winter landscapes, growing larger with each victim, yet never satisfied. Some stories claim that the only way to stop it is fire, intense, purifying flame. Others say its heart must be destroyed, but many accounts end without victory. The creature escapes into the storm, which leads to the most unsettling thought of all. If the Wendigo was once human, then somewhere in the forest right now, something is walking that remembers being a person. Maybe it remembers its name. Maybe it remembers its family. Maybe it remembers the moment it chose survival over morality. And maybe that memory is what makes it hesitate before the kill. As climate patterns shift and winters grow more unpredictable, remote areas become increasingly dangerous. Isolation intensifies fear. Fear sharpens instinct, and instinct, when pushed far enough, becomes something else. The Wendigo legend persists, not because it is proven, but because it fits too well. It thrives in the thin space between psychology and the supernatural, between metaphor and flesh. Is it a spirit? A cautionary tale? A psychological condition? Or a predator that learned to hide inside myth? The truth may never be confirmed. But if you ever find yourself alone in deep winter, if the wind goes silent, if the temperature drops without reason, and if a familiar voice calls your name from beyond the trees, do not answer. Because some hungers are older than history, and once they recognize you, they do not forget. If you have any theories about the Wendigo, or if you've heard stories from your region, comment below. I read every single one. Your idea might shape what we explore next. And this story isn't over. Tomorrow, we begin episode 3, diving into another legend that refuses to stay buried. So make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell icon, because once you step into the dark with us, it doesn't let you go.